Okay, this is Arthur Bush. You're listening to Radio Free Flint on the air here with Brandon Green from ABC 12. He's the sports director. I want to welcome Brandon. Good morning.
Good morning.
Brandon, you're from Maryland, right?
I grew up in Maryland, about 20 minutes south of DC. So I grew up in like this huge basketball culture, which is the DMV, where I remember seeing like Kevin Durant in high school, Jeff Green, Victor Oladipo. That's just naming a few. There's so many great, talented basketball players that have come out of the PG County, DC area, Virginia over the years. And probably latest right now is Hunter Dickinson and Terrence Williams over in Michigan. I remember covering them in high school when they went to DeMatha and Gonzaga. So I always loved basketball. Like it's just in me. So yes, sir.
And where did you go to college at?
Hood College. It's in upstate Maryland.
Where did you get this attraction for sports and basketball?
It was just where I grew up, played basketball all throughout high school, all throughout my childhood, really. And then where I grew up is the DMV area. Being around that basketball culture, you kind of just, it's just like in you. I don't know how to explain it, but you just fall in love with this game because it's everywhere.
Now, when you had a chance to come to Flint, did you know it was a basketball city?
Yeah, not as much as I do now, but just from looking at stuff and doing research on ABC 12 before I came here, you get a sense of like, yeah, this is a sports town.
Yeah, that's a for sure. Maybe an understatement. Brandon, in your work at Channel 12, you cover high school athletes as well, right?
Yes, sir.
I think I read someplace where you said, maybe it was your employer's website, said that you love to do your job in a way that makes all these kids that you're interviewing think they're on ESPN. I get a kick out of that.
When you interview kids, this may be their one and only time that they're ever on TV. But why not do it up big for them and their families? And when you get into that mindset about people, and that's what we all do at the end of the day, is just talk to people all day. So when you start thinking about it like that, you really start to put, in my opinion, start to put your best foot forward.
You also, when you were, your career has progressed, you didn't start in Flint. As I understand it, you started in South Dakota.
Yeah, Sioux Falls.
That's an odd place to start for a kid that loves basketball so much, isn't it?
A little bit. Sioux Falls, don't get me wrong, they love their sports there too. Whether it's football, hockey, they love basketball all year round.
How is Sioux Falls different than Flint?
Just from.
Well, let me ask it the other way. How's Flint different than Sioux Falls?
For me, Flint's a little bit faster. I feel like Sioux Falls is like real Midwest, where it's like a real tight-knit, like everybody knows each other kind of thing because it's so small. Yeah, Sioux Falls is nice, especially downtown Sioux Falls.
What is it that you like about Flint? What was attractive to you to come here?
For me, it was the job because I saw the opportunity to be able to cover Michigan and state, plus get your fill high school sports too. It's like, I don't think you can really beat it. It's a real sneaky sports market. It may not be the highest, but when you start thinking about what you get to cover, it's one of the gems in the U.S.
What attracted me to calling you up and asking you if you'd be a guest on Radio Free Flint was the fact you wrote this story about Hoopers getting lost in the shadows. That is Flint Hoopers who were in the basketball scene around here in large numbers over the past, since the 50s, really. But in the TV era, we've had tremendous attention paid to our athletes here. And you wrote the story that kind of talks about the transition of high school sports. And I guess just to preface.
When we talk about this story, how it really came about was just watching how things changed. I remember the first thing I saw was Jalen Terry from Beecher. When he had offers from like Oregon and Michigan State, he ended up going to Oregon first before leaving and going to DePaul. But then you look at a kid like Keon Minifield Jr. from last year with the same school with Beecher, and he wasn't getting the same looks. But so it was like, what's the problem here? Why isn't he getting the same looks? Why isn't Carmelo Harris getting the same looks? And before I knew it, you just start diving a little deeper into the Monte Allen Johnson stories, where this kid is Mateen Cleave's cousin, but he isn't getting the same looks that his cousin did almost 30 years ago. So when you just start looking at stuff like that, and then when you have kids like Trey McKinney leaving the city before they even entered high school to get a jump start on his high school career, going to Orchard Lake St. Mary's, it all becomes a melting pot. You have to wade through all that and try to figure out what's really going on.
In your article, you did describe Flint as having been a hotbed for basketball for the last 20 years. And it was also, as I think were your words, a hotbed for the NBA. We currently have several D1 college players. We have, I think in your story, you wrote that we had 4 current NBA players.
Yep.
That all come from Flint. In some ways, we've talked a lot on this podcast about the golden age of Flint and reminiscing about, how much sports means to our city. But you almost talk about it as the end of a golden era that we've been through. And it's interesting, generationally, you call the golden era the 1980s, but there's people that, were tremendous athletes and professional football players. You look back at Paul Krause, you look at Paul Staroba at the University of Michigan, later went to the Green Bay Packers and played. But you go back into that era with Don Coleman, the great teams that Michigan State had in the 50s. Later, you go into Glenn Rice era. But I was fascinated by the statement that you made in this article that you wrote and published on TV, that these four players who are currently in the NBA from Flint, not a single one played in Flint in high school.
Oh, no, that's correct. I said people don't connect with most of them because few of them didn't. Like Miles Bridges was here his freshman year, and then he left. Monte Morris was here his whole career, but Kyle Kuzma only played about 1 year, but then JaVale McGee didn't play here at all.
And JaVale McGee obviously is probably as recognized as Flint as they get, with his mother and his aunt, Pam and Paula McGee, who were fabulous basketball players and fabulous people, by the way. Glenn. What I found interesting about your story, we have in Flint went from 4 high schools to 1. You attributed that to, obviously, Flint's population has dropped, the city has. And, we had the water crisis, and some people may have left the city. I don't know that I'm familiar with those statistics, but I'll take you at your word for that. And then there was the layoffs at General Motors, which contributed to all of this. I think you called this whole trend of going to prep schools kind of a snowball effect.
It's not just one happening. Since the 80s, the population's been on a steady decline. But now when you start thinking about school size, like these schools just started going away because of all these things. And then when you really start looking at it from a basketball standpoint, when you have a kid that's supposed to be really good, you want to play against the best competition. And right now, that's not in Flint. Best competition is you got to go down to Detroit, play Detroit schools, or like go to a prep school and get on a national schedule and play these teams, which is why a lot of kids for their AAU teams, they're traveling all over the country, going to all these big tournaments, trying to get in front as many eyes as they can right now.
What is it in the culture of not just Flint, but the country, really? Because this isn't just a Flint problem. This is a problem for schools all over the nation, isn't it?
Yeah, because when you start thinking about prep schools and private schools, kids are able to really get a jump start on life. They really get exposed to stuff early when you leave out of your comfort zone, which is good in a sense, but it's also taking away talent from the local community where it's not like a feeder system like it used to be, where everybody either went to Northern or Central or Southwestern or one of those 4 Flint schools. Now everybody's going to Grand Blanc, Carmen Ainsworth, Hamady, powers. The talent's being more spread out. It's not just coming from one central area anymore. But like you said, that is happening around the country, especially how congested the market is getting for college basketball, and these kids trying to get as much recognition as they can so they could set themselves up for that best route of success.
I realized that after I did some research on this, after I listened to your story, that really we're not alone. I mean, this is a problem that affects a lot of cities across the country and communities, and it may even be embedded in the culture. The culture's changing. So is sports. Is that about right?
Yeah, because it's a huge shift that we're literally in the middle of. So I don't think you can really see it because we're in the middle of it, but everything is changing from just even how the high school game is played to how these kids are marketed to how these kids are recruited. Because I think even we go back a couple of years, everyone used to be on Huddle and put out Huddle mixtapes and send it out to coaches. Now kids are getting professional video editors to edit up a highlight tape so they can put it on Twitter and Instagram.
And it doesn't matter. It doesn't necessarily have to be that they're going to go to a D1 school. A lot of these kids are sending this stuff to, the smaller schools.
Yeah. So when you start thinking about it like that, about how everything's changed, and then you bring in the COVID year where everyone just had to sit, and then all the college kids got a COVID year back, and then the transfer, everything just starts beating down on these high school kids where it's hard for them to get seen.
Now, in your article that you wrote, you said that there were about 4,600 scholarships, and I assume that was nationally.
Yeah.
And there were about 500,000 high school athletes competing for these scholarships. That's some tall odds for people.
Yeah, that's why they say it's the 1% that make it to Division I. Because that number that I got from is just every school gets 13. Every D1 school gets 13 scholarships. So then you just multiply that and you get that figure I got, which I think was like 4,000.
Just for basketball, these numbers?
This is just strictly for basketball.
Oh, okay.
Because the NCAA they do this basically every year where they see how many high school basketball players are in the nation. And for this past couple of years, it's been around the 500,000 mark. When you start thinking about that, there's 500,000 high school basketball players, 4,000, about a little more, about 4,500 scholarships. Then you add in the scholarships that are already spoken for with the returners and everything. And then you add in the COVID year, most of these scholarships are gone. This is just strictly for the D1 level.
This will work its way out of the system, but it's a drop in the bucket, really, isn't it?
Yeah, you gotta be the 1% of the 1%.
And of those people that go to, you may be able to play at the field houses across the country in the big schools at Duke or Michigan State or Northwestern. But even of that group, it's still a very small percentage that ever go to the professional ranks.
Yep.
I don't know what that percentage is, but I've been told that it's about the same as what you were just talking about. There's a lot of dreams that don't get matched. But I must say, in fairness, we've had a lot of Flint athletes that went on and had fabulous long careers overseas. And we have a lot of basketball. In fact, I thought one day that I might do a podcast on that. How many kids are going to other places? Marquise Gray started out and he sounded like a world traveler. He went to 7 or 8 countries in several continents. I think he even played in Japan, and Israel, and Turkey, and I've talked to other athletes who played in other exotics, Greece, in Spain. So they do get. And I just read a story about some Michigan State kids that have been playing together in other. They graduated. Tice, I think Tice was one of them. I can't remember the other kid. So they've had successful careers, and they've been, they've done well financially as well. And some of them's told me, I think Marty Embry told me that he'd rather go play overseas than in the United States. He liked it more.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities to play professional basketball all around the world.
One of the statistics that you quoted in your story was you said there were about 1,000 kids in this transfer portal, which allows And tell us what the transfer portal is and why it's significant.
So the transfer portal is basically like free agency in any sport, where anybody could go anywhere. You just put your name in this portal and coaches can see you, see who you are, what you did. So the transfer portal made its debut back in 2018, but now it's really picked up traction where you could go on different sites and see, because there are sites tracking this, how many kids have entered into the transfer portal. And at one point,
yeah, these are kids that for whatever reason decide they don't want to stay where they were,
yep.
for college. They didn't get to play enough minutes or they were too far away from home. And
one of the changes is that they could go straight and they could go from one campus to another and play. Because it used to be you had to sit out a year of you had to give up eligibility in order to do that. But now you don't have to. You could just go from one thing to another and just play.
Exactly. What got me riled up when I was sitting in my comfortable chair in my living room listening to you talk about this stuff, my first reaction was that doesn't anybody value staying at home anymore? You're talking about these youngsters that are, juniors in high school. I don't know how old that is. It's probably 50 years old. And all of a sudden now they want to go to Phoenix, a lot of them go to Florida at the IM school. And I thought to myself, I said, man, what is that? Why are we changing and encouraging kids to like bust up what could be some of the best years of their life? At least was for my growing up in Flint, some of the best years.
Yeah, it's all about what's best for the kid now. As much as me selfishly, I want these kids to stay so I could cover them. But I understood Jada Nunn wanted to go to Dream City in Phoenix while Monte is going to Dream City in Phoenix. It's because they're trying to set themselves up for their best life. They want to gain that exposure and go to the best school that they can. Because for me, there's no way that you could tell me that a Monte Allen Johnson, who was the SVL MVP, helped lead Grand Blanc to a state championship, and he only has one D1 off. No, like this kid is so skilled. It doesn't always show up in the box score, but he is a tremendous defender, like can guard some of the best point guards and guards in the state and completely take them out the game. But then he's still giving you 12, 14 points with 5 rebounds and 5 assists a game. Like there's no way that this kid shouldn't be at least a high major or low major D1, like, and have all these offers. Or Carmelo Harris, a kid that averaged about 27 points for a Beecher team that they had to go to Breslin to lose. Like he never lost a home game in his career. Like when you start thinking about kids like that, nothing against Wayne State where Carmelo is going, because Wayne State is a great school. It's a great fit for Carmelo, but he should have more offers than what he had. When you start thinking about it from the kid's standpoint, you really get it because they're trying to do what's best for them. Like
what I think about it is the kid's point of view, and that is there's other, is it bad to get? I mean, kids are starting to think like adults. I mean, they're narrowing the road that they're traveling. And when you look at the odds of success, I mean, these kids obviously could play at some Division I school someplace and probably will. But when you look at what a narrow road they're trying to maneuver, they really are putting a lot on a risky bet. Instead, it comes at a cost that, and this is where I started computing. We used to value our neighborhood. I grew up in Flint, and we played basketball or baseball or football every single day. I mean, that was just part of our culture. We didn't have our parents come and bring us orange slices and tell us to take a time out and sit in the middle of the field with our legs crossed. We, when we got done playing ball, we went to the drugstore and got some bottle of pop or something. But we learned to play together in the neighborhood. And so what you're saying is, and what was disturbing to me is that, kids have friends in school. They find their first girlfriend. The advantage is, at least for me, was, I had all my friends from my own neighborhood. We had our class reunion for Southwestern, which is 50, is coming up at the 40th. I think about 2/3 of them were from my elementary. So, I mean, a kid that's moving to Phoenix, he's starting to think like an adult at 16, 15. he's going to give up all that. I don't know. Maybe I'm off base there, but just it struck me as odd. So I guess the question I have is, have we gotten to the point where there's a lack of belief that dreams can come true in Flint?
I don't think we gotten to that point. I just think for what it is right now, everybody's making their best decision because we're not even through COVID yet. Like it's still here. Nothing. I know everyone's saying we're back to normal, but we're not. We're still wading through the repercussions of what happened, of these kids losing a year. So it's just what it is right now. I think everything, in my opinion, will reset itself and we'll go back to a sense of normalcy when you start thinking about kids in high school and then getting the offers that they want. But right now, these kids have, from what they can get, like, let me put it like this. So in AAU, you get seen by all these coaches, all the college coaches come to one area or one tournament, and they can see all the kids they want. So when you start thinking about it like that and thinking about these kids wanting to play a national schedule, to get that same sense all year round and not just in the summertime. So it starts to make sense like, hey, I could go to Texas where I know that we're going to be playing the top teams in the country, and then their coaches are going to be there looking at them, but I could get a look too. So it just increases, which is something that can't happen in Michigan because the MHSAA is not going to allow you to play a national schedule and be a member school. When you start thinking about it like that, it really does become a business decision for these kids when they're thinking about their future.
You know, Brandon, I remember my kids all played basketball in school, Flint Powers, and my boy went up to Saginaw when they had some summer competition with the kids up in Saginaw, and it was an invitational. And I remember in that gym, I can't remember all the coaches, but there were several major coaches, top 10, what I'd call top 10 coaches, who came to watch a guy named Draymond Green. And he wasn't really, I'm sure he was good, but I don't think he was the star of the show back then. I mean, he was a different, his body was different and he was different. I just think, when you look at the history of Flint, the history says that they can play in Flint and somebody will find them. They all didn't get found by Duke and, or Kentucky or Kansas or wherever. But some of them made, as I look at what happened at Michigan State, the kids from Flint, made it. I'm just wondering if we've gotten to a point where that kind of pressure has gotten us, off the rails. My mother told me I had to start over a grade when I was 17. I wouldn't have been too crazy about that. How about you? Did you want to stop high school and start another grade again?
No. No, not really.
That's what these boys are doing, and girls, some of them. They see their careers to get a scholarship, and many of them, they have financial need, and that's their ticket, and that's understandable because kids never stopped out of school unless they went back. And I used to always think of these prep schools as kind of a remedial education kind of place because they used to be, and I don't know if it's still true, but they had to have a certain test score to get into college, right?
For the athletes to get into college?
Used to be. I don't know whatever happened to that rule, but they used to say, okay, you have to have a high enough score on SAT in order to play your first year.
I'm not too familiar. I know you got to take those tests, in a sense, get into college. I didn't know that you had to get I know you got to get a certain score for some schools for them to look at you. I'm not too familiar with that.
They still have that score? They must.
Yeah, I think there is some benchmarks that you have to hit with your GPA and stuff, but
right. So that what it always used to be, at least when I was paying attention, was that they would go to these schools. Usually they were in Pennsylvania or someplace not all that far away, even Kentucky. And they would go there and they'd work on their academics enough that they could get into a top tier college, because there was no question a lot of these kids were talented athletically. But it's evolved to be more than that, if that's still the case.
Yeah, because I think what you're talking about is like kids after high school going to these schools to get the test scores that they need to get into college and all that. But now these kids are just you could just go there and it's like a normal high school education that you get where you're learning everything that, or even more than what you would be learning at your current school. So it's like you're getting the best of both worlds in a sense.
Well, if you look at it for somebody that's going to one of these prep schools just to take an extra year and try to, buff up their academics, because these kids aren't all stupid. A lot of it just has to do with guidance and discipline and, eliminating some distraction. There are a lot of those today. This has really gotten into about money, hasn't it? Now with this image and likeness thing where they can sell their self, or get T-shirts printed with their name or shoes or whatever, or sponsorships. Money's kind of seeped into this, hasn't it, Brandon?
I don't think it's just seeped in. Money's always been in college sports. When you really think about it, the school's paying for these kids' education for them to play a sport for them, play it well, where they could get their scholarship revoked if they're not playing well. So it's always been a thing. Now it's not in the dark anymore. Everything is out front where these kids can make money off their name, image, and likeness.
Yeah, let me come back to this cultural change, because that's what I really see as the thing that we need to ask more questions about. And that is, when we were little, at least I imagine in Maryland, you must have grew up in a neighborhood where people played sports, didn't they?
Yeah. Yep.
We had people like Paul Krause, who's still, I think, leads in the most interceptions in the NFL. He's a defensive back, safety. He was our supervisor for baseball in the summer. And we would go to Freeman School. If Paul Krause was there or he wasn't there, he was being paid to be there by the schools. We'd organize our own games. I think about how this impact of these kids are going off to some other school, whether there's even going to be high school sports before it's all done. The coaches are all forlorn about. Do you see that impacting the ability for kids to participate in athletics?
No, because when you start thinking about kids leaving, it's not everybody. It's the athletes that separate themselves. Y'all know there's different levels to high school athletes. You got kids that are good, kids that are great, and you got these like really, really good kids. When you start thinking about the really, really good kids, they got to capitalize on their talent, their name, and set themselves up for their best opportunity in life. So I think there's always going to be high school sports. I don't think that's ever going away. Now the product will change, but I don't think high school sports in and of itself is ever going to be in jeopardy.
Yeah, I know. One of the articles I read, it talked about, should athletic culture be school culture? And you're a guy that does cover sports and loves it and sees the value of it. And I think what they were talking about in that athletic culture teaches the things that schools try to teach: leadership.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you learn in athletics is how to lose. Have you seen kids that grew up and just didn't know how to lose? Like Draymond?
I wouldn't say that they don't know how to lose, that they just don't like it.
That's right. They learn to accept it, is what I'm trying to say. And not everybody gets to win. We have a capitalistic system where we think that's what's the big deal. But, sometimes in life, losing isn't the worst thing can happen to you. Sometimes it's the best thing. You draw a lesson, you're wise. So I look at that and I say, well, okay, when we were kids, we were playing in the park at Windy 8 Park in the south end of Flint. It was polluted by our culture at the time said, okay, well, we have to have rules in order to govern ourselves. No parents were around, no orange slices and sitting in the middle of the field. We learned to make up rules. Sometimes we had this rule, which was called tie goes to the runner. Have you ever heard that one before?
Yeah. Yep.
What happens is if you have a close play at first base, then you just give it to the runner if it looks like it's real close, because you don't want to fight about it all day because you only have an ump. So you come up with these kind of, and in basketball, I can't, none of us were really dunkers, so we didn't get to too much goaltending. But we didn't, call every foul. But what I'm trying to say is that our culture of not being overboard determined our behavior. And And so, like, we were like the team itself. If you play on a team, a high school team, the team itself enforces the behaviors. It's not, you can have a coach, but I mean, it's the other kids on the team that say, "Hey, man, reel it in a little bit." I just wonder if we lose some of this in thinking about sports in the way that it has to resulting in some professional thing. I guess what I'm worried about is these kids going off to Phoenix without their parents. And I just don't know that they're going to gather all these lessons that are important. You got any feelings?
I don't think, I don't really know if winning has anything to really do with it, because Carmen Ainsworth with Jada Nunn was winning. Amonte Allen Johnson, the last game he played at Grand Blanc was in the D1 state championship. Now they lost to Warren De La Salle, but they're and they're getting these lessons of losing. They just have to grow up a little faster. That's it, which I think is good. I think it's good to expose kids to different environments and see how they fit, because it's going to do nothing but help the kid. They're able to.
You think these kids are going to do just fine, and they're not going to infect the rest of the school culture. In other words, this whole idea that you should plan what you're going to be when you're 16 or 15 years old, what you're going to be. I mean, actually, I wouldn't advise my children to start thinking like, I wouldn't encourage it. I remember one time when my girl was little, she told me she was going to be like Christina Aguilera. I just kind of nodded my head and smiled, but it seems like, this narrow casting that's taking place might not be the best for athletes.
When you say narrow-minded, it's just like trying to get to the pros kind of thing.
The only thing you're going to do when you grow up is get to be a basketball player, or you just like the sport of the furthest odds actually getting to be a professional. Or, they couldn't be an engineer, or they couldn't be, any of these other, they couldn't be a sports director, for example. And we know that there's a lot of these athletes that are really good at that. I listen to Jalen Rose every day, man. He's funny.
Yeah. But when we think about, because I think we do this anyway, picking what we want to be, because if having kids, but if my niece, who I love a lot, said she wanted to be the next, like Lisa Leslie or Maya Moore, and she really wanted to get into a sport, I want to help get her the best opportunity ever to achieve her dream. And that's what I think is everyone's doing right now, because a lot of these kids, their dream might not be the NBA. Their dream might be to be a D1 college basketball player. So if that's what they want to do to achieve their dream, I say, who are we to stop them? Who are we to say, no, you need to build this and this, when they're just trying to achieve their dream?
I guess what I'm saying is maybe it's best if you give them a whole bunch of options and they can explore all kinds of things like music or all the other arts or, any number of other stuff. But I don't think we'll solve this argument today about what's best. I think the society is going to do that, because there's certain values that we have as a society, and part of that is community. And Flint needs that more than ever right now. I talked to a lot of people on this podcast that say the best part of Flint was growing up. They almost speak of it in the rearview mirror, in the sense that this doesn't exist. And I disagree with them, because I think we still do have a sense of community. So are you a Flintstone yet?
No, I don't think, I don't know if I ever become that, because I didn't grow up here, but I try my best to understand the culture and what it means to be a Flintstone.
Have you had a chance to go to Burston Fieldhouse and start bouncing a basketball around down there?
No, I haven't had a chance to do that yet.
Well, if you do, give me a call. I'd like to hear what happened. Brandon Green, you have a good future ahead of you, and I appreciate the time you spent talking to me. Hopefully we'll talk again when I get riled up about your next story. And keep at it.
Yes, sir. Appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
You're certainly very welcome. This is Radio Free Flint. We're signing off. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.